My name is Nora, and I am 28 years old. Last week, I drove back to the house where I grew up, parked across the street, and just sat there for a long time staring at the front porch. It looked smaller than I remembered. Every time it storms, I still hear that door slamming behind me. When I was 13, I was thrown out into a November storm because of a lie I never told. The woman who screamed, "Get out," thought she was erasing me forever. She had no idea those 2 words would become the worst nightmare of her life. Before I share this story with you, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe that truth always finds its way to the surface, because this story is long and heavy, but I promise you by the end, you will feel something shift inside your chest. I need to take you back to the beginning so you understand how I ended up standing barefoot in a storm at 13 years old. It all started with my mom, Claire. She was a nurse at the small community hospital in Cedar Falls, Iowa, and she was the kind of woman who made every room warmer just by walking into it. I lost her to pancreatic cancer when I was 9. Before she got sick, our afternoons had a rhythm to them that I still carry in my bones. She would pick me up from school in her old blue sedan, and by the time we got home, she already had a plan. Most days it was baking. Peanut butter cookies were our thing. She would tie a checkered apron around my waist, the one that was way too big for me, and dragged on the floor, and we would measure out the flour together. The kitchen always smelled like vanilla and melting butter, and she would hum along to whatever was playing on the radio. I can still feel her hand smoothing my hair back when stray strands fell into my face. She used to lean down and whisper, "You are my brave little bird." I did not fully understand what she meant by that back then. I do now. When the cancer spread too fast for the doctors to stop, I spent a lot of evenings sitting beside her hospital bed, reading out loud from her favorite novels. She could not hold the books anymore because her hands shook too much, so I became her reader. I would do the character voices just to make her smile, and she always smiled even on the days when I could tell the pain was unbearable. The afternoon she passed, I was at school. My dad came to pick me up early. His face told me everything before his mouth could form the words. At the hospital, I saw him collapse onto the hallway floor outside her room, crying without making a sound. I had never seen my father cry before. It terrified me in a way that nothing else ever has. The house went quiet after that. No more humming, no more cookie smell drifting from the kitchen, no more brave little bird. Half of my world just folded in on itself and disappeared. My dad, Greg, was an electrician working for the local power company. He was a man who showed love through doing, not through saying. After Claire died, he tried his absolute hardest to be everything for me. He bought a basic cookbook and attempted to learn his way around the kitchen. Every meal was either slightly burned or slightly bland, and sometimes both at the same time, but I ate every bite without complaining because I could see how much effort he put in. On weekends, he would take me to the river to fish. We would sit on the bank for hours, barely catching anything, and he would teach me how to tie different knots and explain how electrical circuits worked. He was not a man of many words when it came to emotions, but when he handed me his old flannel jacket on cold mornings without me even asking, I knew exactly what he was saying. For 2 years, it was just the 2 of us, and we found a way to keep going. The house was not the same, but it was still ours, and I felt safe. That changed when I was 11. Dad started seeing a woman named Diane. She worked as an administrative assistant at a real estate office in town. She had a daughter from a previous marriage named Shelby, who was 2 years older than me. In the beginning, Diane was sweet. She brought me little gifts, a hair clip here, a book there. She told me I had beautiful eyes and that she could see my mother in me. I remember feeling a small flicker of hope that maybe our home could feel warm again, that maybe this woman could fill some of the enormous empty space that Claire left behind. Dad was happier. He laughed more. He stood a little taller. I thought maybe everything was going to be okay. They got married just before I turned 12. Diane and Shelby moved in. That first night, all 4 of us sat around the dinner table together. Diane made a beef stew. Dad took one bite and said it was the best meal he had eaten since Claire passed. I watched Diane's face when he said my mother's name. Something flickered across her eyes, quick and sharp like a match being struck. But she smiled right away, and I told myself I imagined it. I wanted so badly for this to work that I was willing to look past anything. Shelby was 13 when she moved in. She was taller than me with blonde hair, just like her mother. When the adults were around, she was polite enough. She said please and thank you and helped clear the table after dinner. But the very first time we were alone in the house together, she walked into my bedroom, looked around slowly and said, "This used to be a nice house before it got so cluttered." I did not know what to make of that. I was 11. I just stood there feeling a knot form in my stomach without understanding why. Over the next few weeks, I tried hard to connect with her. I asked her to play board games. I invited her to watch movies with me on Saturday afternoons. She always had an excuse. Too busy, too tired, not interested. After a while, I stopped asking. I told myself that these were just growing pains. A new family needed time. I had no idea that the kindness Diane showed in the beginning was just a performance, and that everything was about to shift the moment my father started traveling more for work. It started gradually. Dad got promoted to a position that required him to travel to nearby towns for electrical installations. Some weeks he was gone 3 or 4 days at a time, and in those gaps when he was away, Diane became a completely different person. The change was not dramatic at first. It came in small, quiet ways that were hard to name but impossible to ignore. When Dad was home, Diane would call me down for dinner, ask about my school day, pretend to care about my answers. The moment his truck pulled out of the driveway, the act dropped. She stopped setting a place for me at the table. Instead, she would cook dinner for herself and Shelby, and my portion would end up wrapped in foil and shoved into the back of the refrigerator. No announcement, no call to come eat. I just had to figure it out on my own. Diane poured all of her attention into Shelby. Shopping trips every other weekend. Hair appointments at the salon in town. New outfits hanging in bags on the back of the front door when I came home from school. Shelby would parade around the living room in a new jacket or new boots, and Diane would clap and tell her she looked like a model. I would sit on the stairs watching, and neither of them would look up. The thing that cut deepest in those early months was what Diane did to the photographs. My mother's pictures had always hung in the living room. There was one above the fireplace of Claire, holding me as a baby, both of us laughing. One in the hallway of my parents on their wedding day. A small framed snapshot on the side table of me and Claire at the county fair sharing cotton candy. One afternoon, I came home from school and every single photograph was gone. The walls were bare, the side table was empty. I found them stacked in a cardboard box in the garage shoved behind a bag of old towels. When I asked Diane about it, she shrugged and said the house needed a fresh look. When I told Dad, he promised he would talk to her. He never did. Then came the room. I had slept in the same bedroom since I was a baby. It had a window that looked out over the backyard, and on clear nights I could see the stars from my bed. One Saturday morning, Diane told me to pack my things. Shelby needed the bigger room because she was older and needed more space for her school projects. I was being moved to the small room at the end of the hallway, the one that used to be a storage closet that Dad had converted into a tiny spare bedroom. It had no window. The light was a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. I wanted to scream. I wanted to argue. But I thought about how tired my father looked when he came home from his trips, and I could not bring myself to add another fight to his plate. So I packed my things and moved into the closet room without saying a word. Shelby's cruelty was more precise than her mother's. Where Diane used neglect, Shelby used strategy. One evening, I left my history homework on the kitchen table while I went to the bathroom. When I came back, the pages were soaked through. Shelby was standing nearby holding an empty glass, her face perfectly innocent. "Oh no," she said. "The glass must have tipped over." The assignment was due the next morning. I stayed up until midnight, rewriting it by hand. Another time, my copy of a library book I needed for an English report vanished from my backpack. I tore my room apart looking for it. 3 days later, I found it stuffed behind the couch cushions. When I confronted Shelby, she just widened her eyes and said I was always losing things, and maybe I should try being more organized. She did this over and over, each time a different trick, each time, just small enough that no single incident seemed worth reporting to an adult. The thing that confused me most was what I overheard one night. Shelby was in her room, the door cracked open, talking to a friend on the phone. Her voice was loud enough for me to catch pieces of the conversation from the hallway. "My stepdad literally loves her more than me," she said. "It is so annoying. She gets all the attention." I stood frozen in the dark hallway, trying to make sense of what I had just heard. Because the reality in that house was the exact opposite. I was the one eating cold leftovers alone. I was the one sleeping in a converted closet. I was the one whose mother's photographs were boxed up in the garage. But in Shelby's mind, she was the victim. One rare evening when Dad was home, I tried to talk to him. We were sitting on the back porch after dinner, and I told him that things were different when he was not around. That Diane treated me differently. that I felt like I was disappearing inside my own house. Dad listened. He put his hand on my shoulder, and then he said, "Diane is trying, sweetheart. You need to give her time. We are a new family and everyone has to adjust." He meant well. I know he did. But in that moment, I felt the ground shift under me. My own father was choosing peace over protection. He was not a bad man. He was just a tired one, and tired people take the path of least resistance, even when that path runs right over the people who need them most. After that conversation, I stopped trying to tell anyone. I retreated into myself. I started spending afternoons in the school library long after the final bell rang, reading in the quiet corner by the reference section, delaying the walk home as long as possible. The librarian, a gentle woman with silver hair, never questioned why I was always the last one to leave. Maybe she knew. Maybe she could see it on me the way some people can read weather in the sky. One detail I need to tell you about before the story takes its next turn. Diane had a necklace, a gold chain with a deep red garnet pendant. She wore it almost every day, and on the days she did not wear it, she kept it in a velvet-lined box on the vanity in the master bedroom. She told the whole household the first week she moved in that the necklace was an heirloom passed down from her grandmother and that it was worth more to her than anything else she owned. "Nobody touches this necklace," she said once at dinner, pointing at the chain around her neck with a seriousness that made even Dad sit up straighter. Not ever. I respected that completely. I had never once gone near the master bedroom vanity. I had no reason to. But Diane's obsession with that necklace made it the single most powerful weapon in the house, and someone else figured that out long before I did. By that November, I had grown accustomed to being overlooked. I was used to eating alone, used to the windowless room, used to Shelby's smirk when she passed me in the hallway. I had adapted the way children do when they have no other choice. But there was one thing I was not prepared for. I was not prepared for the night of the storm. The storm came in fast on a Thursday evening in late November. Iowa November storms are not gentle. This one had been building all day, the sky turning a sick greenish grey by mid-afternoon, the wind picking up in sharp gusts that made the windows rattle. By 8 that night, it was a full assault. Rain hammered the roof so hard it sounded like gravel being dumped from the sky. Lightning cracked close and bright, and the thunder followed in deep rolling booms that shook the walls. The old oak tree in the front yard was bending at angles that made me nervous just watching it from inside. Dad was gone. He was working on a job in a town nearly 3 hours away. The storm had knocked out cell reception across the county. There was no way to reach him. It was just me, Diane, and Shelby in the house. I was in my small room, sitting on my bed, reading by the light of my desk lamp, trying to lose myself in a story so I would not think about the storm. The power flickered twice, but held. I could hear Diane moving around the kitchen, downstairs cabinet doors opening and closing the clink of dishes. What I did not know was that Shelby was already in motion. While Diane was downstairs, Shelby crept into the master bedroom. She opened the velvet box on the vanity, lifted out the garnet necklace, and tucked it into the pocket of her hoodie. Then she walked across the hallway to my room. My door was closed. She opened it just enough to slip inside the small closet area where my dresser stood, pulled open the bottom drawer, and buried the necklace under a pile of old shirts I rarely wore. Then she slipped out and closed the door without making a sound. She had planned this for weeks. She knew exactly what that necklace meant to her mother. She knew what its disappearance would trigger. And she knew that once the accusation landed on me, Diane would not stop to ask questions. About 45 minutes later, I heard Diane's footsteps going up the stairs quicker than usual. She was heading to the master bedroom. I found out later she had decided to move the necklace into the small lockbox in the closet because the power was unstable and she worried about the house being dark if the electricity went out completely. She opened the velvet box. Empty. I heard the sound from my room, a sharp gasp, then a drawer being pulled open fast, then another. Diane's voice called out high and thin. "Shelby, come here right now." Shelby appeared in the master bedroom doorway within seconds, almost as if she had been waiting nearby. Her face was arranged in perfect concern, wide eyes, slightly parted lips, a crease of worry on her forehead. "Mom, what is wrong?" Diane held up the empty velvet box. "My necklace is gone." And then Shelby did what she had rehearsed. She hesitated, looked down, bit her bottom lip, let the silence build just long enough to seem reluctant. Then she said in a small voice that trembled slightly at the edges, "I did not want to say anything." But this afternoon when you went to the store, I saw Nora going into your room. I thought maybe she was just looking for something, but she was opening the vanity drawer. I should have said something sooner. I am sorry, Mom." Diane's face transformed. The worry dissolved and something harder took its place. Her jaw tightened. Her nostrils flared. Her hands shook as she set the empty box down on the dresser. She did not pause. She did not consider. She did not ask a single follow-up question. She turned and walked straight to my room. The door flew open so hard it hit the wall behind it. I jumped off my bed, my book falling to the floor. Diane stood in the doorway, breathing hard, her eyes red and furious. "Where is it? Where is what?" "My necklace, Nora. Where is my necklace?" I genuinely did not understand. "I do not know what you are talking about. I have not touched your necklace." She did not believe a word. She pushed past me and started tearing through my room. She pulled open the desk drawer, threw my school papers on the floor. She yanked the blanket off my bed. She opened the closet and shoved my clothes aside. Then she crouched down and pulled open the bottom dresser drawer. Her hand went under the pile of old shirts, and when it came back up, the garnet pendant dangled from her fingers, catching the lamplight. The room went silent. Diane stood up slowly, holding the necklace like a piece of evidence at a trial. I stared at it completely frozen. I had never seen that necklace anywhere except around Diane's neck or inside the velvet box. I had no explanation for how it got into my drawer. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Then Diane spoke, and her voice was low-controlled and devastatingly cold. "You are a thief and a liar. Your mother would be ashamed of you." Those last 5 words hit me harder than anything I had ever experienced. Harder than the day Claire died. Because at least when my mother died, nobody blamed me for it. This was someone using my dead mother as a weapon against me. I felt something inside my chest collapse, like a building folding in on itself. I started crying. "I did not take it. I do not know how it got there. Please, you have to believe me. I would never steal from you." Diane was already walking out of my room. She went downstairs. I followed her, begging. "Please call Dad. He will tell you I would never do this. Please just call him." Diane stopped at the front door. She unlocked it. She pulled it open. The wind screamed into the house, carrying sheets of rain sideways across the porch. The world outside was dark and roaring. She pointed into the storm and said, "Get out of my house. Now." "It is storming. Please, I did not do this. This is my house," and I said, "Get out." She grabbed my arm and pushed me toward the open door. I stumbled across the threshold onto the porch, the rain hitting me like a wall of ice. I was wearing a thin cotton t-shirt and pajama pants. My feet were in house slippers. I had no jacket, no phone, no money. I turned around to plead one more time and the door slammed shut. I heard the deadbolt lock from inside. I stood on the porch in the rain for a moment, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. Then I looked up at the second-floor window. Shelby was standing there, silhouetted against the hallway light behind her. She looked down at me, and she smiled. It was a small, quiet, satisfied smile. Then she reached forward and pulled the curtain closed. That image lives in my memory with a clarity that 15 years has not been able to soften. I stepped off the porch and into the full force of the storm. The rain was not the kind that falls, it was the kind that attacks. It came sideways, driven by wind that howled through the street like something alive and angry. Within seconds, my clothes were completely soaked through. The cotton clung to my skin, and I could feel the cold setting into my bones almost immediately. Cedar Falls in late November is not forgiving. The temperature that night was somewhere around 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough for the rain to feel like needles. Cold enough that every breath I took stung the inside of my lungs. I started walking because standing still felt like giving up, and even at 13, some part of me refused to do that. The streets were empty. Everyone was inside, locked up tight against the storm. Porch lights were off. Windows were dark. The power had gone out on most of the block, and the streetlights were dead. The only light came in flashes of lightning that turned the world white for half a second before plunging it back into darkness. I walked along the edge of the road because the sidewalk was flooded water, rushing along the curb like a shallow river. My slippers got waterlogged within the first block and slipped off my feet. I left them behind and kept going barefoot on the cold, wet asphalt. I was crying, but it did not matter, because the rain washed the tears away as fast as they fell. I called out for my father, not because I thought he could hear me, but because his name was the only word that felt safe in my mouth. Dad. Over and over. Just that one syllable swallowed by the wind. After about 15 minutes of walking, I found a narrow overhang in front of a hardware store that was closed for the night. I pressed myself into the shallow alcove trying to get out of the wind. My body was shaking so hard that my teeth chattered in a rhythm I could not control. I slid down the wall and sat on the wet concrete, pulling my knees to my chest, wrapping my arms around my shins. That was when Diane's words came back to me. Your mother would be ashamed of you. And sitting there in the cold and the dark soaked to the bone, I started to wonder if she was right. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe there was something fundamentally wrong with me that made people leave or turn cruel. My mother left even though she did not choose to. My father chose peace with Diane over protecting me, and now Diane had physically thrown me out. At 13, you do not have the emotional tools to separate someone else's cruelty from your own worth. You just absorb it. You just believe it. I tried to remember my mother's voice. I closed my eyes and searched for it the way you dig through a drawer looking for something precious you know you put there once. But 4 years had worn the edges smooth. I could remember what she looked like. I could remember the smell of her kitchen. But her voice was gone. That realization sitting in that alcove in the rain was its own kind of loss on top of everything else. A cracking sound ripped through the air. I opened my eyes just in time to see a massive tree branch, thick as my waist, come crashing down onto the sidewalk, no more than 6 feet from where I was sitting. The impact shook the ground. If I had still been walking, it would have landed on me. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips, and I started running. I did not know where I was going. I just ran. My bare feet slapped against the pavement, and I felt something sharp slice into the bottom of my right foot, but the adrenaline smothered the pain. I ran until my lungs burned, and then I tripped. My foot caught on an uneven edge of the road, and I went down hard. My knees hit the asphalt first, and I felt the skin tear open on both of them. I lay on the ground for a few seconds, the rain beating down on my back, and I thought about just staying there. But then I lifted my head and saw it. At the end of the block, a faint glow. Orange and warm, flickering behind a window. One house on the whole dark street had a light burning. I pulled myself up. My knees were bleeding, mixing pink with the rainwater running down my shins. My foot throbbed, where whatever I had stepped on had cut into it. I limped toward that light, the last bit of something inside me that had not given up carrying me forward. The house was small, white paint that had gone grey with age, a covered porch with a rocking chair and 2 potted plants. The light was coming from an oil lamp in the front window. I climbed the 3 steps to the porch, leaving wet red footprints behind me, and I knocked. It was barely a knock. My hand was so cold and weak that my knuckles just brushed the wood, but somebody heard. The door opened and a woman stood there. She was 72 years old, though I did not know that yet. She had white hair pulled back in a loose bun, a wool cardigan buttoned up to her throat, and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Her name was Marjorie. She was a retired elementary school teacher. Her husband had passed away 8 years earlier, and she lived alone in this house that she and her husband had bought 40 years before. She looked at me and her hand went to her chest. I can only imagine what she saw. A 13-year-old girl, soaked from head to toe, shivering so violently she could barely stand wearing pajamas, and no shoes, blood running from both knees, lips turning blue. "Oh, dear God," she whispered. She reached out, took my arm, and pulled me inside. The warmth of her house hit me like a wave, and my legs nearly gave out. She guided me to the couch, wrapped a thick wool blanket around my shoulders, and disappeared into the kitchen. She came back with a mug of hot cocoa and a basin of warm water with a clean cloth. She knelt on the floor in front of me and gently cleaned the blood from my knees and the cut on my foot without saying a word. When she finished, she sat beside me and said very quietly, "Tell me what happened to you, sweetheart." And I told her. Everything. The words poured out like the rain outside, messy and chaotic and unstoppable. I told her about Claire, about Dad, about Diane and Shelby, about the necklace and the accusation and the door slamming behind me. I cried so hard at certain points that I could not breathe, and Marjorie just rubbed my back in slow circles and waited. When I finished, her face was still. Not angry in a loud way, angry in a deep way. The kind of anger that does not need to raise its voice because it is so absolutely certain of itself. She looked me in the eyes and said, "No child should be thrown out into a storm. Not ever. Not for any reason." She picked up her phone and tried to call my father. The line was dead. She tried twice more. Nothing. The storm had taken out the phone lines across the area. She set the phone down and said, "You are staying here tonight. You are safe." She set up the couch with clean sheets and an extra quilt. She stoked the fire in the fireplace until the room was golden and warm. She brought me a pair of thick wool socks that were too big for me, but felt like heaven on my frozen feet. Then she sat in the armchair beside me and stayed there reading her book by lamplight until I fell asleep. That night, wrapped in blankets that smelled like lavender and cedar in the home of a woman I barely knew, I understood something that I had never been taught in words, but felt with absolute certainty in my body. Family is not just blood. Family is not just the people who share your last name. Family is whoever opens their door for you when the rest of the world slams theirs shut. The storm broke sometime before dawn. I know because I woke up once in the dark and the silence startled me. No wind, no hammering rain. Just the soft pop and crackle of the fireplace, and Marjorie's steady breathing from the armchair where she had fallen asleep sitting up. She had stayed beside me all night. Morning came grey and still. The world outside looked exhausted, like the storm had used up everything it had. Branches littered the yards. A garbage can lay overturned at the end of the street. Puddles stretched across the road like small lakes. But the sky was calm. Marjorie woke up early, stiff from sleeping in the chair, and made me scrambled eggs and toast. She set a glass of orange juice beside my plate and sat across from me at her small kitchen table while I ate. She did not push me to talk. She just let the silence hold both of us until I was ready. When I finished eating, she stood up, took her car keys from the hook by the door, and said, "We are going to your house." The drive took 4 minutes. When Marjorie pulled into the driveway, I saw the front door of my house, and my whole body tensed. Marjorie put her hand on mine and said, "I am right here." She walked up to the front door and knocked 3 firm, deliberate knocks. Diane opened the door. I watched the colour drain from her face when she saw Marjorie standing there with me beside her. Diane had clearly not expected this. She had expected me to come crawling back alone, or maybe she had not expected me to come back at all. Marjorie did not wait for a greeting. I found this child wandering in last night's storm, soaked through half-frozen bleeding from her knees and her feet. She was close to hypothermia. She told me you threw her out of this house during the worst storm we have had in years. She is 13 years old. Diane's mouth opened and closed. She stepped aside and gestured for me to come in her eyes, darting between Marjorie and the street behind her, checking to see if any neighbours were watching. "It was a misunderstanding," Diane said. She took something of mine and I overreacted. I did not think she would actually leave. Marjorie did not blink. Throwing a 13-year-old child into a November storm is not a misunderstanding, and I want you to know that I will not be forgetting about this. Diane's jaw tightened, but she said nothing more. I walked past her into the house. Shelby was sitting at the top of the stairs watching the whole scene. Our eyes met for a moment. She looked away first. Dad came home the following afternoon. The moment he walked through the door, I was waiting. I told him everything, every detail, the necklace in my drawer, the accusation, the front door opening to the storm, walking barefoot in the rain, the tree branch that nearly crushed me, Marjorie finding me barely conscious on her porch. His face went through stages as I talked. Confusion first, then disbelief, then a slow rising anger that settled into his jaw and his fists and his silence. He turned to Diane. "Is this true?" Diane immediately shifted into defense. "She stole my mother's necklace, Greg. The necklace was in her drawer. What was I supposed to do? I disciplined her. I did not think she would run off into the storm like that." "You pushed her out the door," I said. "You grabbed my arm and pushed me." Diane's eyes narrowed. "That is not how it happened." "It is exactly how it happened." Dad stood between us, torn. I could see the war happening behind his eyes. He believed me. I know he did. But Diane had what looked like evidence, the necklace found in my drawer, and he was a man who did not know how to navigate a situation where the truth and the evidence told different stories. He told Diane that I was not to be punished any further. He told me I was staying in the house and that he would figure this out. And then he went into the garage and sat alone for over an hour. When he came back inside, he told Diane they needed to talk, and they went into their bedroom and closed the door. I could hear their muffled voices rising and falling. Diane crying Dad's voice low and firm, then Diane crying louder. When they came out, nothing was resolved. Dad had chosen the middle ground, trying to keep the household from breaking apart. I understood then that I could not rely on my father to fix this, not because he did not love me, but because he was trapped in a situation he did not know how to escape. But Marjorie was not trapped by anything. Over the following days, Marjorie did what she had promised. She started talking. She spoke to the neighbours on our street. She visited my school and sat down with my homeroom teacher, a woman named Mrs. Thornton, who had been teaching 7th grade for over 20 years. Mrs. Thornton was not surprised by what Marjorie told her. She had noticed the changes in me over the past year. She had watched me withdraw, seen my grades slip from solid Bs to barely passing, observed how I ate lunch alone every day at the back table in the cafeteria. She had flagged it quietly in her own records, but had no concrete evidence to act on. Marjorie gave her that evidence. Mrs. Thornton reported her concerns to the school counsellor, who escalated it to the Department of Human Services. Within a week, a social worker named Angela was assigned to my case. Angela was in her mid-40s with short brown hair and a calm, direct way of speaking that made you feel like she had seen everything and was no longer capable of being shocked. Angela came to our house first. She interviewed Diane and Dad separately. She spoke with me privately in my room, asking careful questions about how I was treated, how often Dad was away, whether I felt safe. I told her the truth. Then came the piece that changed everything. The neighbours across the street, an older couple named the Harrisons, had installed a security camera on their front porch earlier that year after a package was stolen from their doorstep. The camera faced the street and captured a wide-angle view that included our front porch. Angela, following standard procedure, canvassed the immediate area for any potential evidence. When she asked the Harrisons if their camera had been recording the night of the storm, Mr. Harrison checked the footage. The video was grainy and rain-blurred, but it was clear enough. It showed the front door of our house opening. It showed Diane's figure in the doorway. It showed a small figure me being pushed across the threshold. It showed the door slamming shut. And it showed me standing on the porch in the rain alone in thin clothes before walking away into the dark. The timestamp read 9:47 in the evening. Angela watched the footage at the Harrison kitchen table. I was told later that she had to watch it twice because the first time she was so disturbed she missed details. She downloaded a copy onto a department-issued device and took it back to her office. The next step was Shelby. Angela arranged to speak with her privately at school in a small conference room near the guidance office. Shelby had been confident for weeks, secure in the belief that her story had been accepted, but Angela was not Diane. Angela asked questions with surgical precision. She started with easy ones, building trust, getting Shelby comfortable. Then she began asking about timelines. What time did you see Nora enter your mother's bedroom? Around 3 in the afternoon. Angela wrote that down, moved on to other topics. Then circled back 10 minutes later. And when Nora went into the bedroom, was it before or after your mother left for the store? After. My mom was already gone. And what time was that? Maybe around 4. Angela let that sit. Then she said, so Nora entered the bedroom at 3, but your mother did not leave until 4. Shelby's eyes darted. I meant she went in at 4, after my mom left. You said 3 a moment ago. I got confused. Angela pressed further gently but relentlessly. Each question peeled back another layer. Shelby's answers started contradicting themselves in ways she could not recover from. She said, Nora opened the vanity drawer, then changed it to the dresser drawer. She said she was watching from the hallway, then said she saw it from her bedroom through the open door, but Angela had already noted that Shelby's bedroom door faced the opposite direction. The unravelling took about 35 minutes. Shelby went from confident to uncomfortable, to visibly panicking her hands, twisting in her lap, her voice getting smaller with each answer. And then she broke. She started crying, not the controlled tears she used to manipulate her mother, but real shaking sobs. She admitted everything. She had taken the necklace herself. She had planted it in my drawer. She had lied to Diane because she wanted me gone. She said that ever since Diane married Greg, she felt like she was losing her mother. She was afraid that Greg loved me more and that eventually Diane would love me more too, and she would be left with nothing. She said she just wanted things to go back to the way they were before, when it was just her and her mom. Angela documented every word. She filed her report that afternoon. The consequences for Diane came swiftly. She was placed on a child abuse and neglect registry. She was required to complete a mandatory parenting education program. The The Department of Human Services placed the household under supervised monitoring for 12 months, meaning a caseworker would conduct unannounced visits to verify my safety and well-being. In a town the size of Cedar Falls, this kind of thing does not stay private. Word spread within days. Diane's name was on everyone's lips in the grocery store checkout line, at the post office, and the church parking lot after Sunday service. The woman who had screamed, "Get out," into a storm was learning that those words had echoed far beyond the front porch. I should have felt vindicated. Part of me did. But the thing that sat heaviest on my chest, the thing that I carried for years afterward, was not Shelby's lie or Diane's cruelty. It was the fact that my father had not protected me from the start. He had seen the signs. He had heard my words, and he had chosen comfort over courage. That was the wound that took the longest to heal. The unraveling of Diane's position in our household happened faster than anyone expected. Once Angela's report was filed and the truth about Shelby's lie became a matter of official record, the foundation that Diane had built her authority on simply collapsed. Dad changed. Not overnight, and not with some dramatic declaration, but in a way that was visible if you knew where to look. The man who had spent 2 years choosing the path of least resistance suddenly found a wall at the end of that path. He could no longer pretend that keeping the peace was the same thing as doing the right thing. He and Diane argued behind their closed bedroom door almost every night for a week. I could hear fragments through the wall, Diane crying that she was being treated unfairly. Dad's voice steady and low, asking questions she could not answer. Why did you not call me before putting her out? Why did you not wait for me to come home? She is 13. Diane. 13. On the 8th day, Dad came out of the bedroom alone and sat down next to me on the living room couch. He looked older than I had ever seen him. He told me that he had asked Diane to leave. He said that he had failed me, that he should have seen what was happening under his own roof, and that he was sorrier than he knew how to express. Then he said something that I hold on to even now. Your mother would not be ashamed of you, Nora. She would be ashamed of me for letting this happen. Diane packed her things over the next 3 days. She moved in slow, deliberate motions, folding clothes into suitcases, wrapping dishes in newspaper. Shelby packed her own room in silence. Neither of them spoke to me. On the last morning, as they loaded boxes into the back of Diane's car, Shelby paused at the front door. She looked at me from across the living room. There was something in her face that I had never seen before, something that was not anger or satisfaction or manipulation. It looked like regret. But she did not say a word. She walked out and pulled the door shut behind her. Dad filed for divorce the following week. The house felt strange without them. Empty, but not in a sad way. It felt like after a long illness, when the fever finally breaks, and you lie in bed exhausted, but aware that the worst is over. Dad put Claire's photographs back on the walls. He moved me back into my old room with the window that faced the backyard. He did not make a big speech about it. He just carried my things down the hallway one evening and said, "This is your room. It always was." Mrs. Thornton at school arranged for me to start meeting with the school counselor twice a week. Her name was Dr. Avery, a quiet woman with warm brown eyes who had a way of asking questions that made you feel like your answers actually mattered. I did not open up right away. For the first 3 sessions, I barely said anything, but Dr. Avery did not push. She just sat with me in the silence and let me decide when I was ready. When I finally started talking, it was like pulling a thread from a sweater. Once it started, it kept going. I talked about Claire. I talked about the closet room and the cold dinners and the boxed-up photographs. I talked about the night of the storm and what it felt like to stand on that porch and hear the lock click behind me. And I talked about the thing that surprised even me, the guilt I carried for feeling angry at my father. Dr. Avery helped me understand that loving someone and being hurt by them are not opposites. They can exist in the same heart at the same time. That understanding changed something fundamental in me. During those months of recovery, Marjorie became the anchor of my life outside of school. Every Saturday afternoon, I walked to her house at the end of the block. She always had the door unlocked and the kettle on, as if she knew exactly when I would arrive. We did simple things together. She taught me how to tend her vegetable garden, how to prune tomato plants so they would fruit properly, how to test the soil with her fingers to know if it needed water. We baked together not peanut butter cookies like I used to make with Claire, but Marjorie's specialty lemon bars with a shortbread crust that crumbled perfectly. She taught me how to knit. I was terrible at it. My first scarf looked like a fishing net with holes so wide you could fit your fist through them. Marjorie held it up, examined it seriously, and said, "Well, it has character." We both laughed until our eyes watered. But it was the conversations between the activities that mattered most. Marjorie told me about her own life, about her husband Frank, who had been a mail carrier for 30 years and who used to leave little notes in her garden shoes before he went to work each morning. About how after he died, she spent 2 years barely leaving the house because the world outside felt too loud without him. About how she finally started volunteering at the elementary school library just to have a reason to get dressed in the morning, and how being around children gave her a sense of purpose she thought she had lost forever. One afternoon, as we sat on her back porch, shelling peas, she set down her bowl and looked at me with those sharp, kind eyes. "Pain does not define you, Nora," she said. "What you do after the pain does." I carry that sentence the way some people carry a prayer. While I was rebuilding, Diane was facing the consequences of the life she had tried to protect. The mandatory parenting program was embarrassing enough, sitting in a room with other parents who had been reported for various forms of neglect, listening to instructors explain basic concepts like emotional safety and appropriate discipline. But it was the social fallout in Cedar Falls that truly dismantled her. In a small town, everyone knows everyone and everyone talks. The story of what Diane did traveled through every circle within days. Mothers at the grocery store stopped making eye contact with her. Her boss at the real estate office, a woman named Patricia, who had 2 young daughters of her own, called Diane into her office and told her that the company could not afford the association. Diane was let go. Without a job and without a reputation, Diane had nothing left to hold on to in Cedar Falls. She packed up what remained of her life and moved in with her older sister in a town 4 hours south. Shelby did not fare much better. She was pulled out of Cedar Falls Middle School and enrolled in a new school in her aunt's district. But reputations travel even across county lines, especially in the age of the internet. Kids from Cedar Falls who knew the story told kids who knew kids at Shelby's new school. She started over as the girl who framed her stepsister and got her thrown out in a storm. Making friends proved difficult when that is the first thing people learn about you. I want to be honest about how I felt watching all of this unfold. I was not happy about Diane and Shelby's suffering. I did not celebrate their fall, but I would be lying if I said I did not feel a sense of justice settling into place, like a crooked picture frame finally being straightened on the wall. What happened to them was not revenge. It was simply the natural consequence of cruelty meeting truth. At school, something shifted for me too. Dr. Avery suggested I try journaling as a way to process my emotions outside of our sessions. I started writing in a plain spiral notebook every night before bed. At first, it was just scattered thoughts and feelings, messy and raw. But over time, the writing became more structured. I started telling the story of my experience, not as a victim recounting injuries, but as a person trying to make sense of what she had survived. I joined the school's creative writing club at the encouragement of my English teacher. For the spring writing contest, I wrote an essay about what it feels like to be locked out of the place you call home. I did not use any real names. I did not point fingers. I simply wrote about the sensation of standing on the wrong side of a closed door and realizing that belonging is not something anyone can take from you because it lives inside you, not inside a building. The essay won second place in the district competition and was published in the school newspaper. Several students I had never spoken to before came up to me in the hallway and said my words had touched something in them. A girl named Haley, who I later learned was living in a foster home, slipped a note into my locker that read, "Thank you for making me feel less alone." That was the moment I understood that my pain had a purpose. Not because suffering is noble or beautiful. It is neither of those things. But because when you survive something and then speak about it honestly, you create a bridge that someone else can cross. 15 years have passed since that November night, and I have spent every one of them building a life that the 13-year-old girl standing barefoot in the rain could never have imagined. I graduated from the University of Iowa with a degree in social work. I chose that field for one reason, and her name was Angela, the caseworker who showed up at our house, who watched the security camera footage, who sat across from Shelby and pulled the truth out with patience and precision. She showed me what it looks like when someone uses their power to protect a child. I wanted to be that person for someone else. Today, I work for the Department of Human Services in Iowa. I am a Child Protective Services caseworker, the same role Angela held when she changed the course of my life. Every time I knock on a front door clipboard in hand, I think about the doors in my own story. The door Diane slammed behind me. The door Marjorie opened for me. Every door I knock on now holds one of those possibilities behind it, and my job is to make sure the child on the other side ends up safe. Some days are brutal. I have seen things that keep me awake at night. I have sat across from parents who remind me of Diane people who genuinely believe that their anger justifies their cruelty. I have also seen children who remind me of myself, quiet, withdrawn, carrying burdens no child should know the weight of. On those days, I go home, sit on my porch, close my eyes, and remember Marjorie's words. What you do after the pain. That is the compass I steer by. Dad is still in Cedar Falls. He retired from the power company 2 years ago. He spends his time gardening and fishing at the same river where he and I used to sit together on Saturday mornings. Our relationship healed but slowly. There were years of hard conversations of me saying things he did not want to hear, and him sitting with the discomfort of knowing I was right. He apologized many times. Not the same apology repeated, but new ones, each one going a little deeper, each one showing that he had thought more about what he had allowed to happen. I forgave him not all at once, but in layers the way trust is rebuilt, one small act at a time. He was not a villain. He was a man who lost his wife, married the wrong woman, and let his grief make him passive when his daughter needed him to be brave. Understanding that did not erase the hurt, but it made the hurt bearable. Marjorie did not get to see me graduate from college. She passed away when I was 22, peacefully in her sleep on a Tuesday morning in April. I was the one who found her. I had come over for our usual Saturday visit, but I arrived early that week because I had news to share. I had just been accepted into my degree program. I let myself in with the key she had given me years before, and I found her in her armchair by the fireplace, a book open on her lap, her reading glasses still on her face, completely at peace. At her funeral, I was asked to say a few words. I told the small gathering of neighbours and friends about the night she opened her door to a frozen, bleeding child she barely knew. I told them that Marjorie saved my life that night, but that she also saved it every Saturday afterward in smaller, quieter ways that added up to something enormous. After she passed, her lawyer contacted me. Marjorie had left me her house. The little white house with the covered porch and the rocking chair and the vegetable garden in the back. She also left me a handwritten letter sealed in an envelope with my name on it. I opened it sitting on her couch in the same spot where she had wrapped me in a blanket 15 years earlier. The letter said many things, but one paragraph stays with me above all else. The night you knocked on my door, Nora, you were not the only one who was rescued. I had been alone for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to be needed. You gave me a reason to wake up in the morning. You gave me a granddaughter I never had. I did not save you that night. We saved each other. I keep that letter in my wallet. The paper is soft and worn from being unfolded and refolded so many times, but the words are still clear. A few years ago, I received a message on social media from Shelby. It was long and clearly written and rewritten many times. She told me she was 29, living in Colorado, working as a dental hygienist. She said that what she did to me when she was 15 had haunted her every single day since. She said she understood now what jealousy and fear had driven her to do, and that understanding did not excuse it, but she wanted me to know she had spent her adult life trying to become a different person. She said she was sorry and she did not expect or deserve my forgiveness, but she needed me to know. I read the message 3 times. I closed my phone and sat with it for 2 weeks. Part of me wanted to ignore it forever. Part of me wanted to write back something angry, something that would make her feel even a fraction of what I had felt on that porch. But anger takes energy, and I had spent too many years learning how to redirect mine toward things that matter. I wrote back 5 words. I forgive you. For me. I meant it exactly the way it sounds. The forgiveness was not a gift I gave to Shelby. It was a weight I set down for myself. Carrying hatred for someone who wronged you when you were a child is like holding a hot coal and waiting for them to feel the burn. It does not work that way. You just end up with a scar on your palm and a life spent gripping something that gives you nothing. Diane never reached out. Not once in 15 years. I do not know where she lives now. I do not need to. Every time it storms, I still feel it. A tightness in my chest. A flash of cold along my spine. The phantom sound of a door slamming. But I do not run from it anymore. I sit with it. I let it move through me like weather. Because that is all it is now. Weather. It passes. What I learned from that night and from everything that followed is this: the people who throw you out into the storm think they are punishing you. They think they are erasing you, removing you from the story, making you disappear. But what they are really doing is punishing themselves. Because from the moment they close that door, they lose the most valuable thing they could have held on to, which is the trust and love of someone who would have given it freely if only they had been kind enough to deserve it. That storm did not break me. It broke the lie that I needed their approval to be worthy of love. It showed me that worthiness is not something granted to you by the people in your house. It is something you carry inside yourself, and no one, not a stepmother, not a stepsister, not a locked door, not a November storm, can take it from you. If you are watching this right now and you have ever been thrown out into your own storm, whether that storm was a person, a situation, a betrayal, or a loss so heavy you thought it would flatten you, I want you to know something. The door that closed behind you was never your only door. Keep walking. Somebody somewhere has a light on for you. I know because I found mine. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to break you and instead it made you stronger? Drop your story in the comments below, because I believe that sharing what we survive is one of the most powerful things we can do for each other. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button so it can reach someone who might need to hear it tonight. Subscribe to this channel so you do not miss the next story, and share this video with someone you love, because you never know who might be standing in their own storm right now, waiting for somebody to open a door. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And most of all, thank you for being the kind of person who stays until the end of a story about survival, because that tells me something beautiful about your heart. Stay safe, stay kind, and always, always leave a light on.